Overnight, the Supreme Court came out with its decision about South Carolina versus Planned Parenthood. And in a 6-3 decision, which went very much along party lines overall, the decision came down that, yes, South Carolina can deny Planned Parenthood Medicaid funding. Now, you're going to hear many people on the left that are going to complain and say, well, women have lost all their rights to their bodies, that women will no longer have health care from Planned Parenthood. In fact, some will suggest that Planned Parenthood will go bankrupt and they will close, and this will affect the entire nation. That's an exaggeration. That's not correct. And I'll explain that in just one second. But what we do know for sure is that the Supreme Court looked at case history and looked over at the Medicare funding legislation from Congress. And it's very clear that individuals cannot sue states because Medicare is being denied to a service provider. There's just not an obligation for that. In addition, the left makes several claims trying to create rights that do not exist. Rights that were not created in legislation on Medicare or anything else. So that's also something not publicly addressed a lot. There's a lot of judicial activism coming from 3 members of the Supreme Court that the rest of the Supreme Court says shouldn't happen. If the left wants more rights conferred by Congress, then Congress should write it into law. In effect, they said, if you don't like this decision that South Carolina can cut off the funding, the Medicare reimbursement to Planned Parenthood, then go to Congress and write a better law and make sure that it says you'd have to include Planned Parenthood. I don't think that's very likely. Depending on how you look at the wording of the abortion laws across the country, there's somewhere between 12 to 16 states that have some degree of restrictions on abortions that are considered to be extreme, depending on exactly the wording and the interpretation by any individual. Now, let's assume, like many on the left will, that means that all 16 of these states are going to deny Planned Parenthood its funding. And therefore, the left would say that means that Planned Parenthood would close. That's not true. While the exact figures aren't completely known, what we do know is that about a third of all the funding for Planned Parenthood, which makes about $1.5 to $2 billion a year, about 1/3 of that comes from Medicaid reimbursement. So if Planned Parenthood were to lose 100% of all of its Medicaid funding, then they would be short somewhere around $500 to $650 million, about a third of their budget. And that's something that they could make up either by getting more donations from those on the left or cutting some of its staff, some of its services, or some of its locations, or a combination of all of that, and it would continue to be able to operate. Again, Planned Parenthood is a non-profit, so they don't need to make a profit to continue to exist. They just need to cover costs. So there are many ways that they would continue to be able to operate if they were to lose all Medicaid funding, reimbursements. But they're not going to lose that. Again, it's 12 to 16 states, so about a third of all the states in the country, in the worst case scenario, would stop funding Planned Parenthood. So that would mean about a third of the revenues they're making, which, going by the most recent years, the estimate would put it at about $650 million. So 1/3 of that, let's call it, rounding up about $200 million would be a shortfall. That's something that Planned Parenthood could easily, either because of its reserves or its donations or cutting some of its services, its personnel, or its locations, could easily make up that $200 million and continue to operate essentially as it already does. So Planned Parenthood isn't going out of business, which would then mean that women haven't lost all of their rights. They have not lost all of their opportunities and their choices. And even those who do choose to have abortions through Planned Parenthood would still have that ability almost unchanged throughout most of the nation. In fact, the majority of the nation. So the arguments from the left kind of fall flat. It isn't an obligation of the federal government or states to pay for Planned Parenthood. It is not an obligation, it is not a right for individuals to force a state to pay for Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood can exist and function almost completely as it does without federal funding, especially since we're talking about only a third of the nation, not all of the nation. But it will be interesting to hear the conversations that will come out of the left-leaning news media and from many of the politicians on the left, as they are going to claim that somehow women have been completely denied all of their rights, which is factually not correct. And they will exaggerate this case using fear and fear-mongering to try and demand that women vote Democrat. This is absolutely going to be a political issue. This is going to be about the 2026 midterm elections. And they are going to demonize Donald Trump. They will demonize MAGA and America First and Republicans. And they will demonize the religious and say that you have just denied women all of their rights. Women must be Democrats. You have no choice. And you have no other option. And I disagree. If anything, what the Supreme Court has decided is very clear. Congress should make a better law. And if Democrats truly have the will of the public behind them, then they should very easily be able to go to their members in Congress, have them rewrite the law in terms of Medicaid to guarantee that Planned Parenthood and other nonprofits or other organizations like them will continue to receive all of the Medicaid funding that they have been receiving. It's that simple. If the left is that concerned about this issue, the remedy is very simple. Make a new law. Go to your members of Congress, convince them to write a new law, a better law, present that to the Congress. The public can confirm and insist that their members either vote for or against that bill, and that's it. But it will be interesting to hear the fear-mongering. And if you take nothing else away from this but that, note the amount of fear-mongering that is going to be put out there. That you will hear many on the left say, this is going to kill women. This is going to deny them their rights. That women, all women across the nation, including in states like New York and California, the bluer than blue strongholds that guarantee that women will always have the right to have an abortion, even in late-term abortions, up to and including the moment of birth, if not, as some on the left have suggested, even beyond birth, to be able to have these abortions. That's not a realistic fear. That's not a realistic claim. But they will use the fear to gain power, they hope, in 2026 in the midterm elections and possibly in 2028 in the next presidential election. What do you think? Do you think that the United States government should be required to pay for a private nonprofit business in every case? That they are obligated to pay for health services that can be found via other businesses and other institutions? Are we required to pay for Planned Parenthood? And if so, why? Especially when others do the same thing that they do. Because it's a choice. It's a preference. And does that preference, that choice, mean it's an obligation? How do you feel? I look forward to hearing your answers.